Well, Chris is with us. Now the host of First Things First, the new FS1 morning show, and he has brought his friends along with him, Nick Wright and Jenna Wolf. So the gang is all here.
We are here.
Welcome, gang. You did the show from here yesterday, too.
Yes.
You had a little bit better weather than us.
Not much better, Dave. Not much better.
I thought it was a little bit better.
It was earlier, so it was a little chillier.
Yes. You didn't have the beautiful precipitation, though. Hey, Chris, we got a chance to visit when we were here for preseason practice on our tour this year. You were here as well.
Yes.
And we discussed this a little bit, but what's it like for you to come back, especially on a game day? I mean, we're sitting here in the shadow of the horseshoe where you did so many great things. What are the emotions that go through your mind?
It's amazing. For me, it takes me back to the decision that I made as a young man. Led by my mother, to decide to come to Ohio State. That decision right there really governed all the rest of my decisions. I don't see another career path that would have been better than the one I chose. The love that the Buckeyes have, not only for their athletes, but for their school. How they've played football so well for such a long time. And then Urban Meyer, when he came back, that made it even extra special for me with him and I, with the great relationship that we have. There's a number of kids on the roster that I've coached in high school. So I got tremendous love for the Buckeyes. I don't think my career, my life ends up where it is unless I decide to take that 90-mile journey to Central Ohio and come play football in Columbus.
I want to break this game down with you guys a little bit. You did a fabulous job on the show talking about it yesterday. And one of the points that you mentioned, Nick, was that you really feel like this game could kind of define J.T. Barrett's legacy. Tell me why.
I mean, that's kind of unfair, but like the sports analysis isn't always fair.
Yeah, no doubt.
He was so tremendous as a freshman, and he was good as a sophomore. He was good as a junior, but I think after his freshman year, people were like, wow, this might be the greatest quarterback in the history of the university. And then at the beginning of his senior season, the loss to Oklahoma when he didn't play well, I think a lot of people said the difference in that game was the quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield, who was a Heisman contender, and then JT, who didn't play that great. Since then, he's been outstanding. He hasn't thrown an interception since then. If they win this game, they're back in the national championship, the playoff discussion. People forget about that Oklahoma game, and you can look at the totality of his career. One of the only players in the history of college football with 90 passing touchdowns, 30 rushing touchdowns, and you can say, wow, for 4 years, this guy was a consistent performer. So for his sake, he's, Chris said, the only 3-year captain in the history of the school. Yeah. His teammates and coaches clearly adore him. I hope he plays well because he deserves to have this as a capstone on his career here.
I think it's amazing, too, with the numbers that he's put up this year. I mean, you mentioned it. He's accounted for 22 touchdowns with no picks since that Oklahoma game because he's run for 4 as well. And then he's really nowhere to be found on the Heisman list. I mean, people are really holding that Oklahoma game against him. And so we'll see here whether or not he's able to kind of have a counter to that game out here later today.
Can I just pause for a second?
Yeah.
Still snowing. I just want to make sure. Does anyone realize that is not this is not a green screen? It is
the real deal here, Jenna.
It is snowing, and you look at that.
Beautiful.
These guys are no joke. It's snowing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
As Jerry said off the top of the show, we have to be here. They chose to be here. It's amazing.
They don't. It's crazy.
Jenny, you had Urban Meyer on the set with you for a nice chunk of time yesterday.
Yes.
He was very generous with his time. What was the biggest thing that stood out in talking to him?
How calm he is. This is a big game for them. This is a big game for his team. These guys remember what happened last year. His team remembers. These fans remember. The city remembers. He was so calm, so even-keeled. He knew exactly what happened last year. He said, we're going to come into it this year. We have a, what was the expression he used?
Well, he said, when contact is made, you revert to your training.
That's it. When the game starts, it's all about football, and that's it. You take the emotion out, you take the revenge factor out, you take history out, and you play football. And if his guys know nothing else, it's that this is going to just be a football game, and they're going to have to find a way to take every single distraction out of it. And he says his guys are ready. Last year, they thought they may have taken that team a little bit for granted when they lost in overtime. They said they will not do it again this year. They're ready for the game.
Well, it's tough to take the #2 team in the country for granted, especially when you have the revenge factor. I thought it was incredibly refreshing this week, guys. I'm sure you saw it, where people asked Urban Meyer at his press conference, are you considering revenge as a motive in this game? And he said, yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Yes. But, Chris, you were saying yesterday you think this Ohio State team ought to be terrified. That was your word, terrified of Penn State. Why should they be terrified?
Well, it's a good Penn State team, and I think it starts with their offensive coordinator. I haven't seen an attack like Penn State, coming from an Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan style coaching, I mean, it's not just between the tackles. It's not trying to overpower you. They do it with formations. They do it with a variety of things. They get matchups. Their offensive coordinator, I believe, has changed the face with James Franklin, the head coach, but he's changed the face of Penn State because they're not an offensive line grinded out defensive dominant team. They are big plays. They are matchups. They are not one singular tight formation. They're not one set. So it makes it very, very difficult to defend them.
I want to talk a little bit about the show. You guys are a couple months into it now. You were primarily a radio guy.
I was.
Nick,
yes.
Have you enjoyed the TV component of it? What's been the coolest part of it?
I think, to be totally honest, the coolest part of it...
Other than working with Janet.
Well, working with these two people has been amazing. Like, I'll tell a quick story. Chris and I, we were setting up the office in New York, and he brings out, because he has all these awesome pieces of memorabilia. He doesn't have room for them in his apartment at home. So he's setting them up, and he brings out, it's a framed picture of it, one of the first ever ESPN the magazines, and he's on the cover of it. It was right after the '98 season. And I had this sense of deja vu, and I realized I had that magazine pinned on my wall growing up at home. And to be able to, a guy that I watched and looked up to have him be my partner, someone like Jenna, who is a total TV pro, guide us through it, and that we get to set the table for the sports conversation for the day because we're so early. Now, the downside so early, as you know in TV, is the 3 a.m. wake-up calls, but you deal with it. And to be in New York City and be able to do that and be able to work with these guys and lead off into Skip and Shannon and then Colin, it's really awesome. It's been great.
From your point of view, Jenna, you did sports for a big portion of your career, then you went to the Today Show.
That's what I thought you were going to say. For a
you did show
years.
for a substantial amount of time. You did sports, and then you were at the Today Show.
Yes.
What's it like to focus back in on sports again?
I missed it. I was a fan when I left. I didn't realize how much I was going to miss being in sports. And if I tell you, these guys are so much fun to be with. This guy knows everything there is. He's a walking encyclopedia. And if you ever want to fill in the blanks with true grit on-the-field stories of things, perspective that we will never get, that's what CC brings. It is such a pleasure. Not to mention, these guys are really funny, and we have such a good time. And what you see on the air, besides when they get mad at me, is what you see off the air. We have a lot of fun.
The show is a ton of fun to watch. First things first, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, every weekday on FS1. Thanks for, on a day where you didn't have to get up early,
we wanted to.
coming out to hang out with us and enjoy the game.
I got you one time. OH.
I-O.
There you go.
Well done. Let's send it over to the show.